question is, what's real? What's deception? What should we be paying any attention to? What is it that's driving us insane?
He knew the world would not be the same.
Something happening here.
Truth Connections.
If you're listening to this, you are the resistance.
Good evening and welcome to another edition of Truth Connections Radio. We're very happy you're here with us this evening, live or at our archives after the show or at our YouTube channel. The song we opened up with was a song by a house favorite of ours, Protetius, and the song is called Spiritual Warfare. I want to bring on Rand real quick. Rand, you there?
I'm here, Kathy. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for coming with us tonight. Always a pleasure to have you on with us.
Great to be here.
Thank you. Today marks the rebirth of consciousness with the transit of Venus across the sun, and it's said to aid humanity in moving us into the fourth dimension and increases third eye activation. And its opportunity is for us to release negative energy that we hold within our chakra systems and old tapes in our minds that have been affecting us. And it's said to trust the process and aid us into moving forward into a love vibration. Tonight's guest on Truth Connections isn't short on accomplishments or the diversity of his talents. He holds a Ph.D. from Washington University, St. Louis. He's a mathematician, a social scientist, who today teaches political science at Emory University in Alabama. He's a fellow thespian who is also a baritone soloist and a videographer and an author of 2 best-selling books. He is also a remote viewing scholar who is the founder and chief investigator and director of the Far Sight Institute, which is a nonprofit research and educational organization dedicated to the study of remote viewing using technologies as is done for the U.S. military. Help me welcome a man who believes everything is frequency and consciousness, Mr. Courtney Brown, to the show. Welcome, Courtney. How are you?
Well, Catherine, I'm very good, and I want to thank you so much for inviting me on the show. And Rand, hello to you as well.
It's nice to have you. You're welcome.
Great to have you.
As these topics of conversation normally go, we're going to be all over the place because everything is truly connected. Why don't you first begin with telling us a little bit about who you are and how you came to be an expert at remote viewing?
Sure. Actually, that's an interesting story because I am the leading scholar on the planet anywhere for studying remote viewing as it is performed using the methodologies that were developed by the U.S. military and used for espionage purposes, or methodologies that are derivative of those procedures. And the reason I can say that is I'm the only scholar, meaning there is no other professor, no other academic anywhere at any major university that studies remote viewing, which is a really interesting thing. I remember that John Mack, the late John Mack, who used to study the so-called abduction phenomenon, he once told me that he's absolutely astounded that none of his colleagues at Harvard thought this was an interesting topic to investigate. So it's really a very interesting topic, and it's amazing that other scholars don't do it. I must say, however, that all of the remote viewing studies that I do not do at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. At Emory University in Atlanta, I'm an applied mathematician in a social science department, and I teach advanced statistics, nonlinear modeling, things like that at the university.
Okay.
I do not do any remote viewing there, but I am the director of the Far Sight Institute. That's spelled F-A-R-S-I-G-H-T, like seeing far. And the website, for those who are interested, is www.farsight.org, O-R-G, because we are a nonprofit. So basically my interest in remote viewing started in the 1990s when the military declassified its original program into remote viewing. They knew it was going to become public, and what they basically wanted to do is they wanted it to stay in the fringe community. They didn't want it to go mainstream, so they hoped it would stay in a New Age bookstore environment. They weren't expecting mainstream scientists like myself to get really interested in it. But it was something that was so intriguing to me that I said that if it's true, then I've just got to do this. So the basic idea behind remote viewing is that it's a mental procedure. And in the old days, they used to call things like this psychic, but in the modern day, they don't use that anymore. They don't say that. They call this remote viewing, or they say it's the application of nonlinear consciousness, or it's related to psi phenomena, PSI phenomena. But it's a mental procedure, and people do it when they go into a room. They're very highly trained. Typically, I don't work with remote viewers that have been trained less than 10 years. The typical remote viewers that I work with, and I work with the very best in the planet. Usually it's in terms of groups. I work with groups of them. And there's only about 20 of them, so we're not talking about a lot of people. They have been trained intensively for usually a decade or more in the use of these procedures. And it's like playing the piano. Anyone can go up to a piano and bang on it and make noise. But if you want to play at Carnegie Hall, you have to get good at it. And there's a reason why it takes so long, and I'll explain that as we get on into the program. But the main idea is that it's just like exactly like the use of playing the piano. It just takes a long time for these procedures to be mastered. So what I do is I work with these people, and we work on projects, and we have been putting together a series of scientific projects for well over 10 years. And finally, we have decided that it's really time to tell people about what we have been finding. So I'm really excited and happy that you've brought me on the show today, so I can tell your listeners a little bit more about what we've been discovering. And actually, I hope you get to ask me why remote viewing actually works, because the very first thing people are going to see they're going to encounter once they hear a show like this, they're going to leave the show and talk to somebody else, and the first thing the person's going to do is, oh, remote viewing, that's bunk, that doesn't really happen. So they have to know what it is, how come it actually can work, and why it's not so easily perceived by just everyday people.
Well, I can tell them that it is fact and it does work, because I have actually sensed being remote viewed before by people. So I'm certain it is definitely a possibility. And how it works and what you can actually see is what I'm not sure about. And I know there's a couple different types of remote viewing. One is singular, and the other one's with a partner or a team of people, correct?
Well, most of the remote viewing that's done by people that work with me in projects at the Institute are done solo. All remote viewing is done blind, meaning no one knows anything about the target, and that's the thing that you're supposed to be able to perceive at all.
Right.
But the thing that you're talking about is when they're monitored, and that's usually done with people who have less training, and they need a little bit of encouragement, a little bit of direction while they're doing their sessions. And during training, monitoring is very common, because while you're in the middle of the session, it's good to have someone who knows about remote viewing giving you advice on what to do next and next and next. That's what training is all about. But
right.
Once you become at the level of the people that I work with, then they don't want anybody around. They go into a room with a desk in it, a stack of paper, a pen, no knowledge of anything, and they just come out an hour later with a full detailed description of the so-called target. Now, the target is the thing that they're supposed to perceive. In the experiments that we do at the Farsight Institute, we often have a great deal of control, scientific controls placed on the nature of the target, some of which are absolutely fascinating. Perhaps I can get into those after I mention a little bit more about the physics of remote viewing for how it can actually work. But the controls that we go through are absolutely astounding. Once you realize what we do, you it's just a jaw dropper when you say, you mean you do that and it still works?
Pretty interesting, I have to say.
Yeah.
By the way, I might mention what this remote viewing phenomena is like. The experience of remote viewing is different from normal everyday stuff. What it feels like is the following. If, for example, right now I'm looking at my computer screen, so all of your listeners are looking at something, probably their computer screens, or they're looking at their desk or something. But whatever they're looking at is a very bright image that's coming in through the eyes. So it's a bright ocular image. Well, while your eyes are still open, imagine a pencil, and you bring that memory of the pencil up from your hard drive of the brain, the memory of it, and put it in front of you, the memory. And now, so you're having your eyes open, you're still looking at the computer or the desk or your whatever, but now you've also got this image of the pencil in front of you. Notice the pink eraser, the sharp point, and the Eberhardt number 2 label. Well, if you look at the pencil, you'll notice that's a dimmer image than the image that's being sent from the eyes. So the ocular image, the image that you're actually seeing, is brighter than the pencil image, which you're remembering. And the pencil image looks a little translucent. You can see through it and still see the ocular image. Well, the remote viewing image is dimmer than the remembered image by a lot. And it's foggier, it's fuzzier. You don't see it so clearly. So that's why trained remote viewers need the training, so that they can focus in on these. They have to be able to identify what the remote viewing images look like, and they have to be able to focus on them and concentrate on them, so that while their eyes are still open and they're still accessing memories, they have to be able to ignore both anything that comes in through the eyes and anything of memory, and focus just on those remote viewing images. And that's no mean trick. That's what the training is all about, to get people to be able to do that. But when they can do that, and when they're really good, I tell you, it's you just have no idea what we have done with it. So, by the way, I should also say, with your ocular images, you just look around. You just look around with your eyes and you see whatever you want and you notice it. Mm-hmm. Remote viewing is not like that. Remote viewing, it's like the biblical thing, ask and ye shall receive. With remote viewing, you have to actually probe or ask something, questions, and you get these information back. It's an interesting thing. It's not like you just see something and it's just there. You probe it, and then the information comes, and you quickly write it down, and you probe again, and the information comes, and you have to write it down.
So it's almost like a divine source as well that you're tapped into, as well as a visual.
Yeah, you get the visual and you get all the other senses. You get the hearing, touch, sight, taste, and smell. But the process itself is interesting in that you need to actually poke it. It's like a person that you think is either asleep or dead on the couch, and you have to poke the person in order to find out if the person is alive or well. And you poke it, and then the person jumps up. So it's like that. With remote viewing, you actually have to poke it. You have to actually ask questions.
Is that so you know that you're not just astral traveling?
No, it's part of the process. It's actually part of the phenomenon. We don't completely understand that aspect of it. But it's not like you just walk into a room and everything's just accessible to you and you're just looking around and noticing everything. You're actually saying, okay, I'm in this room. What's in the corner? You have to actually think what's in the corner, and then suddenly you see the corner. Okay. What's in the other corner? Okay, then you see what's in the other corner. But it's not like the stuff just sort of comes to you. You have to actually do this probing phenomenon, which is sort of weird. We don't really completely understand why that has to be done.
Maybe it's like a download that you're just getting little bits at once. Is the end result like a photographic image, though, once it's all pulled together?
There are images, and there are...
I just see stick figures when people draw what they've seen.
Yeah, well, that's because they're not very good artists like me. But we have some people who are really great artists. And when people are really great artists, then it's different. When people are really great artists, then they do more than stick figures. They really draw really detailed drawings. One of the best remote viewers on the planet is a man called Dick Allgaier. And he is also a celebrity newscaster in the state of Hawaii, working at KITV. And he's very interesting because he's a good artist. He can actually draw things. So when he draws people, they actually look like people. They don't look like stick figures. When I do things with remote viewing, it's more like stick figures. One of the things that we're going to be incorporating into training in the future is art, so people learn how to draw. The Hawaii Remote Viewing Guild, which is led by Glenn Wheaton he came out of Special Forces Intelligence, and he's a retired military remote viewer. He's the one who started the Hawaii Remote Viewers Guild, and that's where Dick Allgaier does his work. Well, they have started training with Jim Channon, who was one of the leaders, perhaps the leader of the 1st Earth Battalion, the real-life person who was played by Jeff Bridges in the movie Men Who Stare at Goats. Mm-hmm. And that person, Jim Channon, he's actually an artist, and so they're actually getting literally art training for things like that.
Great idea. I mean, it makes total sense.
Because you can see the image, and the image is quite clear, but translating that into something that's visual on a piece of paper requires that artistry skill. Remember the movie with Tom Cruise, Minority Report?
Yes.
Where they had these 3 really super psychics that were in a comatose state in a pool, and they were hooked up with wires and stuff like that. Well, those images that they were getting from their brains were being put onto a computer, and Tom Cruise was going up to the huge screen of the computer and moving the images around. Well, in the future, at some point in time, they'll be able to do that. They'll be able to get the visual images directly using wires, and then they'll be able to get really good images computer enhanced, but we're not there yet. So we have to rely on the viewer seeing these things and then drawing these things as best as they can.
It makes perfect sense that that's the way it's going to go, and because it's almost like, I guess you would get a photographic image in your head.
Yeah, and there's different types of images. Some of them are very bright and clear, but most of them are dull and foggy and fuzzy. And when you get a bright and clear image, it doesn't stay around very long. It's a flash. So you have to be able to remember what you got flashed in front of you and sketch it all down. And we have some procedures that were gotten from the Hawaii Remote Viewers Guild originally, where they specifically look for these flash sketches, and they look up and they get them, and then they quickly sketch them down. And we have found those to be extremely valuable. The only trouble is you have to be good at drawing those things. But you know, one of the things that your listeners might be interested in is why remote viewing can actually work, because absolutely every one of your listeners is going to leave this interview and go talk about how exciting this new field is, and run into somebody, probably most people, who will just say, oh, that's a lot of bones. How can that work? People can remote view. Why can't I? Why haven't I won the lottery? So they're going to sort of talk about negative things immediately. And so it's very useful for the listeners to understand a little bit of what we now understand is the physics of remote viewing, to understand why it happens and why it's so difficult to explain it and sometimes convince people that have had no experience with it that it actually is real. If you'd like me to go into that, I'd be very happy to do that.
Sure, and I understand, because a couple of years ago, remote viewing made me very nervous, because I wasn't sure and I didn't know about it. So when you don't know about it, something, you usually fear it as a, primal response. But this crowd's a little more versed in stuff like that. So they're very open. So you can say whatever you want to say, Courtney.
Oh, sure. Okay. Well, very basically, physicists have never, ever found anything solid. There's no such thing as solid matter. They've never discovered anything solid. They originally thought that subatomic particles might be solid. Like your desk is not solid. It's all empty space with these molecules in it, but empty space between the molecules. And when they thought that finally they're going to get to little billiard ball type particles, when they break them up, they get other small things. So really, the only thing that physicists have ever discovered is frequencies. They've only discovered energy. They've never actually seen something solid like mass. Now, they do talk about mass, like the mass of the desk, but E equals mc squared. Now, c is the speed of light squared. It's still just the speed of light squared. So the speed of light is a constant. The constant squared is just a constant. So c squared is just a constant. So they're basically saying it's a scaling factor. So E equals mc squared. They're saying energy is equal to mass. Now, that's not a metaphor. That's real. That means energy is equivalent to mass. They've never actually found anything solid, ever. There are a few physicists that are still searching for a solid billiard ball type anything. And those people, as Henry Stapp, the physicist out at UC Berkeley, has called them, are called particleists, meaning people who are looking for particles. Basically, they're almost an extinct species. The entire physics community, or nearly the entire physics community, understands that at the quantum level, nothing exists except frequencies. So what happens to us? How do we get to be? How are we here? Well, if there's no such thing as mass, what am I seeing when I look in a mirror? What is this computer screen that I'm looking at? What is my couch? What is my floor if there's no such thing as mass? Well, there's only frequencies. And if there's only frequencies, how do you actually get something that looks like something that's solid? Well, the whole universe is based on just frequencies. We know that. It's an empirical fact. What happens when frequencies interact? Frequencies are waves, and when waves interact, there's only two things that can happen. That's either constructive or destructive interference. Now, constructive interference is when a peak of one wave hits a peak of another wave. Well, they add together and produce a bigger peak. But if a peak of one wave hits the trough of another wave, they cancel each other out.
Okay.
That's destructive interference. Those are the only two things that can happen in the universe.
Sounds sort of like a magnetic kind of situation.
Well, even magnetic can be understood in terms of these peaks and troughs interacting.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right. So the basic idea is what happens when you get a bunch of these waves that interact together and they have this constructive and destructive interference. Well, what actually happens is very unusual. They bunch together in a way that's very much like a snake that's just eaten a rat. So if you see a snake and it eats a rat, you'll see there's a bulge in the snake. Well, consider the snake like the frequencies that are the base of the universe. The bulge that's in the snake is like the particle, or the wave frequencies that are interacting produce a bulb in the space-time continuum. In the actual fabric of space, there is this bulge. And this bulge is called a wave packet. And what that wave packet is your particle. So if you're wondering where this particle is, it's in that wave packet. But it's not in any one spot in the wave packet. It's in the whole thing. And that wave packet is mostly confined to a small area, but little bits of it trail off into infinities, both sides of it. So that particle can actually sort of be any place. It's most likely to be in a localized area, but it could be sort of anywhere. So how do you actually get it to be a real thing? So that, for example, there's a photon, and it hits a photographic plate and becomes a real thing, like a real solid particle, and makes a dot on the photographic plate. Well, the only thing that is possible to happen is what they call a superposition. A superposition is when those waves interact and they bunch together to produce this bulge. Nothing else in the universe can happen. You have destructive and constructive interference, and they produce bulges. Nothing else can happen. Just bulges in the fabric of space. And so what happens is when you actually have a particle hitting a photographic plate, they're making another signature type of bulge in the fabric of space to produce that spot on the photographic plate. And the photographic plate is made up of all these particles as well. So if you look at you and I, what are we?
Particles.
That's true, but if all those particles are really just waves in a state of superposition, what we are, what you and I are, Catherine, Rand, myself, what all three of us are vast and complex superposition ensembles, large groups of superpositions all sort of vibrating. And so this is where the problems really occur. What I've said so far is not in dispute. The quantum physicists have long known that subatomic particles, even up to atoms, behave this way. The trouble is that they don't like, historically, they have not liked the idea of saying, well, if the quantum world is based on that stuff, that's not us. We're like real beings. I'm like, my name is Courtney. Here I am. I'm a real thing. I'm not a quantum thing. I'm not something that doesn't really have a space to it. I'm like right here and now. So what they've done is they've drawn a line in the sand called the line of decoherence. And that's the line that separates the small, the quantum world, from the large, which is us, the macro world. And they said, it's like anything that happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Well, anything that happens in the quantum world stays in the quantum world. Then they just say it doesn't apply to the macro world. It's true. And a lot of physicists have said this is just nuts. Even Roger Penrose, the famous mathematician, he said, hey, look, you can't keep this up forever. This is not going to work. But the point is, that's a paraphrase of stuff he said, but the basic, he's just looking at some of the contradictions here. The basic thing is, how can we say that the quantum world goes on one set of principles and the macro world goes on a completely set of different principles that we call classical? So it really doesn't make sense. But what happened is, in the early part of the 20th century, pioneered by people like Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg, they came up with an idea that was ultimately tied to Niels Bohr, called the collapse of the wave function. And that means that all subatomic particles are actually these wave packets that you see, these bulges in the fabric of space. And these wave packets collapse. And they collapse when they're observed by an external observer. So you and I are like gods as far as they're concerned. As soon as we look at a wave packet, snap, the packet destroys itself and a real particle comes out. Now, later people, like Hugh Everett, a physicist who was doing his graduate work at the University of Princeton, and his dissertation came out in 1957, he said, that was bunk. That was really stupid. How can you say that we're external to the quantum world when in fact we're made up of the quantum world? And how can you say that we snap it into reality? We snap it just by looking at it. It's the collapse of the wave function is now known as the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, and that's because Niels Bohr came from Copenhagen. They had a set of conferences they were doing out in Brussels, and that was called the Solvay conferences, and this sort of all came out of that. Well, this Copenhagen interpretation, that means the collapse of the wave function, was challenged by, originally it was challenged by Hugh Everett, who was a graduate student working under John Wheeler at Princeton University. And he said, you know, this is a monstrosity, this Copenhagen interpretation. What really is, there's a better interpretation. And the interpretation is that there's got to be a zillion infinite versions of us, of everything. And that it's not just quantum things that have a wave function, but that big things have a wave function. So if there's a quantum particle, that has a wave function, but then the molecule has a wave function, and then people have a wave function, and then people in their house has a wave function, and the planet has a wave function. They're just more and more complex wave functions, because the various waves that are comprising of time and space are just sort of building up into greater complexity as you're getting bigger things. And so what you have is wave functions in which all types of varieties of different things can happen. So, Catherine, I'm going to ask you a personal question. What color is the shirt or blouse that you're wearing today?
Can you tell me?
No, I have no idea.
Okay. It's sort of like a grayish, bluish purple.
Perfect. And so what Hugh Everett would say is that there is, in reality, another version of you in which you're wearing, say, a pink blouse or a green blouse or, you know, a red blouse or something like that. And they all those versions are equally real, and they all live within that bulge in the snake, that bulge in the fabric of time and space, that bulge in the fabric of space, because all of those multiple versions of the frequencies all exist. And then the Copenhagen interpretation said, but there is me. I'm standing here. I'm real. So one has to snap out, and you have to discard the others. And Hugh Everett says, no, you don't have to discard anything. The other versions are equally real, just as you and I. But you see, the Copenhagen interpretation from that point of view is not a scientific postulate that just stands. It's a theological postulate, because you see what happens is the physicists like Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg, and even later on Einstein, who had terrible quarrels with the quantum mechanical people, they didn't like the idea of there being multiple versions. They said there's going to be one version of me and only, and it's something that they wanted to believe. It's not something that they had any basis in scientific fact. It was not something that they did tests for, but they just said, I'm going to bend this science so that it comes up with one of me and only one of me. And it was Hugh Everett that said, I'm sorry, but that just doesn't hold. So the empirical experimental work actually does support Hugh Everett's version more than it supports the Copenhagen interpretation. I should add, though, that both of them give equally accurate probabilistic results on a mathematical level. It's just that in terms of interpretation of what's actually happening, the Copenhagen interpretation is really awkward. The multiple worlds or other worlds interpretation is based on an experiment, and by the way, I'm tying this into remote viewing, but you'll understand why remote viewing is working, why it's real, as soon as you understand that we are a wave function. But it's based on an early experiment that's not in dispute at all. It's a classical experiment. It's called the two-slit experiment. And what this two-slit experiment is you have a photon that is put into a contraption. And this contraption has a barrier that has two slits in it, two small openings. And then the photon has to decide whether it's going to go through the slit on the right or the slit on the left. Well, it goes through. And then on the other side of the barrier, there's a photographic plate where it makes a dot. Well, after you put a lot of photons, one at a time, each one at a time, into the contraption, you expect to get two lines on the photographic plate for a bunch of photons that went in one of the slits and a bunch of photons that went in the other. But that's not what you get. What you get is a pattern of bands that looks very much like a Venetian blind. And what that means is that the photon stayed as a wave all the way until it hit the photographic plate.
I have seen that before, but it was horizontal and the lines were wavy.
Yeah. Yeah, and what happens is, that's exactly right, and what happens is that the photons stayed as a wave, and it's just like the ocean waves when it hits two barriers. The waves go through both holes in the barriers, and what happens is when the peaks of one wave hits the peak of another wave, you get an additional, they sum together and it gets a bigger peak, and when a peak hits a trough, they cancel out. And so what is happening is the bands that you see on the photographic plate that look like a Venetian blind, what you get is whenever a peak hit another peak, well, it was producing a hit. And that means a spot on the photographic plate. And whenever a peak was hitting a trough, you get nothing, and so you'd get a dark area on the photographic plate. And this is so mysterious to the physicists because they say, but we were only letting in one photon at a time. What was it interacting with? The bands tell you that it's interacting with other photons because there's constructive and destructive interference. But with what? There's only one of the little guys. And so the bands clearly indicate that it's interacting with something. So Hugh Everett said the straightforward interpretation of this is that it's interacting with them inside the wave packet, and that all those other things that it's interacting with don't materialize, but they're obviously there because the photon's interacting with them. And they obviously are just as real as the photon that we see. So there are other worlds or other realms, and we only see one version of ourselves. And since everything is a frequency-based, you can actually say it's very much like an AM radio. You tune in a station on an AM radio based on frequency. Well, you're not actually hearing a station that's somewhere else. You're actually not able to hear that other station at all. So anything that is not on the frequency in which you're looking at, to create the superposition which you identify as yourself at that instant in time, any other thing is not visible to you. That was the basic idea behind physics. So the bottom line is, and let me pause here so both Catherine and Rand, you can ask a question, but the bottom line is that since we are all wave functions, what happens is that we, as wave functions, we overlap with essentially everything else that's in the universe. Meaning the waves that compose us overlap with the same waves that make up the planet Jupiter, that make up Mars, that make up you, Catherine, that make up you, Rand, or anybody else. They overlap a little bit. Now, most of my wave function is concentrated in a spot, but a little bit of it is overlapping with the same waves that make up everything else. What the remote viewers are able to do is to use their brain to focus on the vibrations that are coming through and are picked up by the brain in different areas of the superposition. So they can pick up something else at a target because parts of them as remote viewers overlap with that target. And the brain is a very, very highly advanced receiver, just like the AM radio, and is able to tune in to various things.
Similar to the term the law of one.
Yes.
That we're all connected to all other...
It's exactly that.
Interesting.
Well, like the morphogenic field, like we just listen for the wave and feel it.
That's exactly that. That's how it actually works out. A good way to look at this, and many physicists are actually looking at this, by the way, this way, is like a hologram. If you look at a hologram, a good hologram in a good laboratory actually looks like a thing. It looks like an image of some person. And it's just right there in front of you. But obviously it's not real. It's not solid, but it is an image, and it looks like a real image. Well, that hologram is made up of literally frequencies that are in states of constructive and destructive interference or superpositions. Well, what you can say about our physical brains is that our physical brains are very narrow band hologram generators. Meaning, we perceive from a wide spectrum within the electromagnetic spectrum only a very narrow band. And all other frequencies for all other things our brain selects out. And it is absolutely no different than a very fine FM or AM or shortwave radio that is really precise at narrowing in on one frequency and only one frequency. If we can do it with technology, well, the human nervous system is much more advanced than a radio.
Wow.
So that's essentially what we are. We are very narrow band hologram projectors, or actually generators. We're not projecting as much as we're receiving. And from an evolutionary basis, you can understand this, because we have known in remote viewing studies that time doesn't exist. It's an illusion. So you can say, well, what happened to the past? I don't see it anymore. So we've been doing this interview for about 45 minutes now. Well, where is the first minute of it? Where did it go? I don't see it anymore. I only see now, at the time of now. Well, what's happening is that the brain needed to perceive the now more than it needed to perceive the past or the future. So it specialized in the now. And if you're out there as a cave person in the early evolutionary days, if you were confronted by a lion, you needed to see the lion. You didn't need to see the gazelle of yesterday, and you don't need to see the elephant of tomorrow. You need to see the lion of today, or you're going to be eaten.
Right.
So the brain is a very specialized device, a very specialized mechanism that is a very narrow band hologram generator. It selects out and it literally disregards everything else. And it's so convincing that it looks like this is only one of us. And so Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg and even Einstein said there can be only one of us. But it's wrong.
Have we trained ourselves, in essence, to have tunnel vision?
Absolutely. That's exactly the point. The brains are designed to do that. Now, what remote viewers train to do is, since the brain is a hologram generator, or actually a hologram receiver, what the remote viewers train to do is they train the brain, the mind, to be able to pick up other frequencies that are less obvious. But the reason remote viewing is so hard to do, it's a natural phenomenon, and we all get intuitive pulses, sometimes flashes, premonitions, but to be able to do it so regularly and with such a great precision requires tremendous skill. And the reason that skill and training is necessary is because our brains are so good at selecting out a certain set of frequencies and discarding all the rest. If the brains weren't so good at doing that, we would be seeing the future and the past all over the place. By the way, this also tells you something that your audience may resonate with. It tells you a lot about the extraterrestrials. Virtually all extraterrestrial human contacts result in the humans reporting that the extraterrestrials talk with telepathy, that they often don't use words, that they often have profound psychic abilities. And we often hear stories about humans sort of thinking, wow, I wish we were advanced as like the extraterrestrials. I wish we could do that. I wish we had those skills. Sort of like we're in the romper room or kindergarten of existence, and the ETs are doing really cool stuff.
Well, that's because they say that we use 10% or less of our brain capacity.
No, it's actually the reverse.
Really?
The ETs are not the ones who are the most advanced. We are the ones who are the ones.
Wow, that's interesting.
It's very interesting, and it's really important to understand this. When the ETs look at this, remember, before we were born here as humans, we were one of them. We just didn't pop up as Catherine, Rand, and Courtney. Before we had many experiences, and before we came here, we were one of them already. And let's imagine a situation where you go with some friends out to do bungee jumping. And you have a group of 4 of you. And one of them is courageous enough to do bungee jumping. So one of you gets tied up with the bungee rope around her or his leg and leaps off of the bridge and goes bungee dropping. What does everyone else do? Now look, you were all together, right? All 4 of you were together. You're all equal. But as soon as the person leaps off of the bridge, you're no longer equal. The 3 that are still on the bridge look over and say, I hope she makes it. and also they say, wow, she's really brave. That's us. What's happened is when we decided to come into human form, we knew we were incarnating and coming into a physical form that had an extremely narrow band receiver. Our brains were very narrow band receivers. And so what basically happens is the more narrow the band is of the frequencies that the brain will receive, the more you feel cut off from everything else. You could build a different brain, not a better brain, a different brain of the types that the ETs have, and they simply have a wider band receiver for their brains. So they pick up the past, the future, they're telepathic. They have a wider band receiver, just like a different type of radio that picks up a bunch of stations all at once, and that they can sort of focus their concentration on which station they want to listen to, but they're getting signals from different places. We have a very narrow band receiver. Now, what happens is, since we have a narrow band receiver, we forget who we were. We don't remember that we were once an ET. We don't remember who we exist, what our past is, what other experiences we've had. We become isolated. We feel alone. And as far as the ETs are concerned, it's like the bungee jumping experience. That isolated or alone person is the person dropping from the bridge with only a cord tied to her leg to save her. And that person feels alone. That's the excitement of bungee jumping. And so when the ETs look at us, they say, wow, I can't believe they're courageous enough to do that, to cut themselves off, to be in this narrow band receiver. They don't even remember who we are. We're like their best friends. And so that's us. And so the real trick about being human is to rediscover who we are and then to reintegrate with our higher selves, which is really difficult to do as narrow band receivers because the perceptions are not easy to get. So when you look at, I have a really good friend who I was with at a conference, and he brought his sister along. And his sister was sort of new agey, and she said, Mike, my next life, I'm not going to be a human. This is such a drag. I'm going to be like an advanced ET. I'm going to get more telepathy and stuff like that. I mean, that's ridiculous to be living out here in the doghouse. And I looked at her and I said, wow, you missed everything. You missed the whole point. This is where the excitement is. This is it. I mean, you can't get better than this. Telepathy and stuff like that, that's a dime a dozen out there in the real world.
I can't wait.
You had that before. This is the cool stuff where you're sort of cut off. It's like, how many times have we seen a Discovery Channel show or a History Channel show where you see these mountain people out there in the wilderness and everyone's glued to the TV station? Why? Because they're alone out there all by themselves facing the elements. They're sort of scary. That's what it's like being a human to the rest of the universe. They're looking at us and saying, wow, look at them directly. So they look at us with great admiration. And so one of the things that I sort of see as the role of remote viewing, it helps to explain to humans who we are, and it helps to raise our sense of self-esteem so that we don't look at the ETs in terms of dependency and need and begging. Because when the ETs look at us and we're begging and dependent and asking and feeling like we're incapable of anything, they just turn away. There's nothing they can do. It's just like, what can you do to that situation? If, on the other hand, they see a person who feels self-empowered, sovereign, totally in control of themselves, knowing who they are, and wanting to reach out on an equal level and communicate, the ETs, my experience has been, they get really excited about that. Because finally, out of the masses of 7 billion people on the planet, someone's woken up and is looking back at the ETs and saying, hi guys, it's me again. And the ETs just go crazy with stuff like that. They say, wow, this is incredible. Look, wow, a human has woken up. This is like amazing. And the reason it's so important for the ETs is because they want to be able to advance in their evolution. And here we are in human terms. When we wake up, we're a real super bright ray of hope for the ETs. Because in a very real sense, they can say, oh my gosh, if the human can do it, then we can do it. Anyone can do it. Then we can do it. And that's why it's so great being a human right here and now. Because they're looking at us, not because we're kindergartners. They're looking at us with this spectacular hope and saying, I hope they pull this off. Because if they can do it, then anyone, anywhere can do it. It's a big deal to be human in this
For them, it must be the excitement like a spirit would have when they realize a psyche can communicate with them.
Yeah, that's a really good thing. There's a popular show out. Let me see. I think it's called Being Human on the Sci-Fi Channel, and there's a female ghost on it. I think there's a British version of the same show. Anyway, there's a female ghost, and she's always so surprised when a human can look at her, a live human with a physical body can look at her and see her. And she looks at the human and says, "You can see me?" Well, that's so, Catherine, that's sort of your example, and that's a good example of how the ETs react when they see somebody who can, reach out in calmness. This idea of dependency, need, begging, they get that all the time, and there's nothing they can do except walk away.
Mm-hmm. And on the flip side, being an ET having a wider bandwidth, or being a remote viewer having a wider bandwidth and being flooded with all that information, it probably can make you feel a little schizophrenic if you're not used to it.
Well, not really. It's actually very normal. So since it's a very normal process, we don't really run into that. However, ever since the beginning of the Farsight Institute, we've always had a declaration on our website that states that anyone who's had a history of psychiatric problems should not do remote viewing or get involved in it. And the reason is because people who have had a history of psychiatric problems often imagine things. And one of the problems is that they start believing their imaginations, and then someone with a psychiatric problem could then start saying, "Oh, the remote viewers are proving that all my imaginations are real," and that could run into trouble. So if you're a normal, healthy human being, then our experience is that it's just a normal aspect of life. It's just learning how to tune in the radio
right
to a different part, but it's your radio, and it's your ability to begin with. And it's no more dangerous than spending 10 years learning how to play the piano really well, and eventually showing up at the Boston Pops or the Carnegie Hall or something like that. I should say that for a great many of your listeners, the projects that we have are really astounding that we've done. And there's 4 major projects that we have done and focused on over the recent years. And they are called the Multiple Universes Project, where we actually did an experiment to test, just like the two-slit experiment, but this time using remote viewing, to test if there are multiple realities. And that is a fascinating thing. And we did that, and it took a whole year to do that. We have all those results done. We also looked at an operational base on Mars. A lot of people say, oh, there's bases on Mars and bases on the Moon. We actually have a very good picture from NASA of the base, of a spray, of a nozzle from which the spray was coming out, a pipeline, and the remote viewers went under totally squeaky clean, totally blind conditions. Described everything. By the way, again, let me emphasize, remote viewing can only be done under totally blind conditions. It simply doesn't work if you know anything about the target. So you can't say, let's go remote view the Eiffel Tower. Your memory comes in, all your ideas and fantasies come in of the Eiffel Tower, and it's hopeless for the remote viewing to actually work. It only can work if there's absolutely no idea of anything. All you know is that there's a target, nothing else, and you do the procedures. We also looked at a planet. Remember Darth Vader and the Death Star in Star Wars blew up a planet? It was in the original Star Wars, which is now Episode 4, and it was Princess Leia's home planet or something. Well, we actually found a planet that really did explode, and it was between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter. We did a knockdown, drag-out study on the exploding planet. We call that planet Maldek, M-A-L-D-K, and that exploding planet has a tremendous amount of astronomical support for it that was collected and organized by Thomas Van Flandern, the late Thomas Van Flandern, who was an extremely mainstream astronomer who ran his department of celestial mechanics at the Naval Observatory. And other mainstream astronomers scoffed at the idea simply because they didn't want to think that a planet could explode. They were okay with the idea of a sun exploding, but they were not okay with the idea of a planet exploding, so they disregarded it. But the astronomical evidence, if you look at all of it, it's whoppingly oversighted. It's all lopsided in the direction of favoring the idea that a planet did explode. Well, we did a remote viewing study on it to see if Thomas Van Flandern was right, and wow, the results are correct. There was a planet. And then we also did a major study, which I think many of your listeners would be interested in, and that's the Earth changes study. And that's Earth changes between the years 2008, which already passed, and June 1st, 2013. A lot of people are worried about or thinking about post-December 2012. What is that period going to be? And we found some amazing results out of that. All of those projects, plus extra information about how the remote viewing works, can be found on a DVD that we just put out. And the reason we did this was because our website, which is www.farsight, F-A-R-S-I-G-H-T, like seeing far.org, can be a bit overwhelming because we have so much information. We are the only place anywhere. There's no other place.
It's a great site.
Yeah, we're the only place anywhere that has these studies that are with all the data available for people. Everything's free. I mean, all the things are, all the data are there. There's videos there. Everything, and we have these studies one after the next after the next. We're the only place that does this, and this is very different from having, say, one remote viewer getting on late night radio and saying, "Oh, we did a project and our remote viewers saw X, Y, Z." Well, that's hearsay. Meaning, in a court of law, you can't go and say, "I heard such and such and such, so this is what's going to happen." The judge would say, "You can't say that. You can't just say you heard such and such. You have to, the people you heard it from have to actually be here so we can interrogate them." So a court of law would throw a single remote viewer sort of talking about what his or her remote viewers saw. They would just throw it out. So what we do with our stuff is we put out all the data, we describe all the procedures that were used, and we let the public participate by letting them collect the sessions and while we're actually doing it, so that they know that we are impossible to cheat. And so anyway, I can explain more about that, but the DVD is the place to actually go to get the summary of, to get the full picture, not just a summary, but the full picture of all of these results. It's the place to start. If you're interested in what we're doing, the DVD is called The Farsight Experiments. And it's the place, and you can see about it right on the home page of our website, which is farsight.org.
And we will always include your links to your books on our truthconnections.wordpress.com page, so people have a direct link for your books in our library to go and purchase your books. And all the links will always accompany this actual show's link on our Blog Talk and our WordPress.com website, so people can always have access to your links and your page and all the other things that you offer for people to use for research. So thanks for that. Right now, I am going to play a song by a gentleman by the name of Fred Cusinado. It's in 432 Hertz, and it's called A New Earth. Enjoy. We'll see in about 5 minutes.
Okay, that was Fred Cusinato with his new tune, The New Earth, which we like. Kind of soaks right into you. And this is Truth Connections Radio with your host, Kathy Bucklew, and myself, co-host Rand, and our guest, Courtney Brown. Courtney, we have a caller holding. Are you willing to take a call?
Of course.
Great.
Great.
Caller, you are live with Truth Connections Radio.
Hi, this is Keddish. How many remote viewers have been out there for decades that have never had any physical contact with the people they're working with yet?
What do you mean when you say they have not had any contact with a person? What person?
I believe 100% that I've been doing remote viewing with somebody, maybe not on this planet. I don't know. And I have never been debriefed, and I almost went crazy waiting for a debrief, but now I realize that it doesn't matter. Everything's going as planned, and it just doesn't matter.
What I can say is what you're talking about is different from what we're focusing on here. But you're talking about some type of natural thing that you're experiencing, whether it's remote viewing or not. But what we're talking about is specific procedures that are done by people who are trained to do that, to get information, perceptions that are then verified. And so what we do is we have people do these experiments, and then we have those people give their data to scientists such as myself, who then compare the data to the actual targets or the things they were supposed to be perceiving to evaluate the accuracy.
Yeah, like with the crucifix ruse.
The crucifixion ruse, what you're mentioning now, is a project that I released independently of the Farsight Institute. And that is because we did a project with one of the best remote viewers on the planet that was investigating the so-called crucifixion drama involving Jesus. And the results were so startling and so very, very different from the biblical account that when the board of directors met at the Farsight Institute, we decided not to include that project. They didn't even look at the data, not to include that project as a Farsight Institute project because of the controversy associated with it. They just didn't think the Institute should get involved with that. But the data are available. They have their own website, crucifixionruse.com, and there is a DVD, The Crucifixion Ruse, that is available on the website. The Crucifixion Ruse is a very interesting project, and one which I truly like.
I love that topic. I think it's fascinating.
We have more information than anybody anywhere on remote viewing. There's so much, you sort of wonder where to begin. That's why we started doing these DVDs. Now, the Crucifixion Ruse is a very interesting project. I often don't talk about it on the radio because a lot of radio hosts say that they want to avoid politics and religion.
No, you can say whatever you want to say here, Courtney.
Well,
and I have to say, what happened in that experiment, I completely resonate with it, and it feels like it's just the way it was, like it's fact. So I don't doubt it one bit.
Well, what happened with that? I'll just mention a little bit about the Crucifixion Ruse since people have brought it up. The Crucifixion Ruse is available on a DVD, and what we do is called the Crucifixion Ruse, and it's available on Amazon. And the best way to see it was so controversial, we made the trailer the first 22 minutes of the DVD, so it's a long trailer, so that people would have no ambiguity about what they're getting, so that they would know what they're getting. And the basic bottom line is that now what I'm going to say initially will sound different than what it actually is. It initially sounds as if I'm saying something against Jesus. In reality, I'm saying something much more positive than anything that's ever been said about Jesus. But you have to hear the whole story to understand why. So let me get to the thing that sounds like it's not so great with regard to Jesus, and then I'll mention just a few minutes, and then you can ask me more if you want, of why it's the reverse, why it means that Jesus was much bigger, greater than anything we ever thought of. The Crucifixion Ruse investigates the crucifixion drama, and the conclusion of the very complicated scientific design that was triangulating with one of the best remote viewers of the planet, all different aspects of the crucifixion drama, meaning who was where and when during the entire thing, comes up with the basic following conclusion. Jesus was not crucified. Somebody else was crucified instead of him. That person was a follower sort of a follower of the large group that was following Jesus. He was mentally ill, deluded. He actually thought he was the Messiah, but he was just a nutty guy. Some of the disciples, including Judas, knew that Jesus was going to be arrested by the authorities and killed. Jesus had no intention or desire to go through such a thing, because in the higher realms of existence, those things simply don't happen. And it was a completely unnecessary, painful experience, and he saw no reason to go through that. In fact, if he had gone through that, it would have lowered his vibration down to us. But that's something I explain more thoroughly in the DVD, The Crucifixion Ruse. But the basic idea is that Jesus couldn't stop us from wanting to have that experience. We, as humans, felt we needed to go through this polarized drama between good and evil. We needed to have this sacrifice. We believed that we were bad, that we were sinful, and that we need to have our sins purged from us, and somebody needed to die to do it. Well, this mentally ill guy volunteered. The disciples, a couple of them, very few were in on the conspiracy. I hate to use that word in this context, but that's what it was. And they went to this guy and said, "Hey, you're right. You are the one. You're the one. Hey, and we need this. There's got to be a sacrifice. Do you want to do it?" Apparently, he was drugged so that he wouldn't feel too much pain. That's also why he didn't speak back to people that were asking him questions. That's also why he couldn't carry the cross. And Peter was not in on the conspiracy, which explains why Peter denied him 3 times. When people said, "You know this guy, is this Jesus?" And Peter 3 times says, "I don't know who you're talking about. This is not the guy." Because Peter really didn't know who this guy was. So Jesus, on the other hand, knew that this had to happen, that humans demanded it. And when this occurred, Jesus basically saw no alternative to letting the humans have their story. He also knew, and the few disciples who were in on the conspiracy knew, that this would turn him into a martyr and help to spread his real message that God is a loving God, and that love is the frequency that drives the universe, that would spread throughout the millennia and change humanity. Now you have to understand what humanity was like then. We were a slave-based culture back then. There was no unions or rights to work or anything. The Roman Empire was a slave-based empire. The Greeks were a slave-based empire. The Aztecs had slaves. Everybody was slaves. It was slavery everywhere. Add 2,000 years to a slavery empire, and what do you got? You have a civilization that really just needs to be nuked and wiped off. I mean, it's a write-off civilization. They were about to lose the human experiment completely.
Interesting.
So Jesus needed to come in at that time to nudge it 2,000 years ago so that we would have things such as human rights. I mean, it was only just a few decades ago during the Jimmy Carter time period of his presidency that human rights was put in on the international agenda for negotiations. Before that, human rights were never part of... You could have bilateral or multilateral arrangements with any country, but human rights was not on the table. It was only in the 1970s that Jimmy Carter put that on the table, and ever since then. And where did Jimmy Carter get that? He got that out of Christian thinking. So Christian thinking, Jesus' thoughts, actually permeated all religions everywhere, no matter what religions they are. This idea that we are sovereign people, that love is the thing that drives the universe, all that stuff came out of Christianity, and that was necessary because we had lost it totally back in those days. And so what Jesus did know, he was entirely clairvoyant. We actually have good descriptions of what he was doing at each place. When Judas was taking the authorities to the mentally ill guy to make sure that the authorities arrested that guy and not Jesus, Judas was one of Jesus' most trusted friends. And so when Judas was taking the authorities to that guy, he was sweating bullets, because the reason is, if they discovered it was a ruse, they would have crucified Judas as well. It was a real life-threatening thing that Judas did. In addition, Jesus at that time was safely hidden someplace else, and we actually have very good descriptions of where he was. And during the actual crucifixion itself, Jesus was someplace else. But what he was doing is he was extremely telepathic, and the data are really beautiful on this. He was actually directing everything. He was actually communicating like you would communicate on a cell phone, but he was doing it telepathically with a whole bunch of other people that you didn't see, these invisible people, the heavenly hosts, as you would call them. He was actually telling them and organizing them and telling them what to do. He was the guy in charge, and he liked being in charge. He was making sure that if there was going to be a crucifixion drama, it was going to be done right. He wasn't going to waste it.
Right.
And it was absolutely fascinating to see that. Anyway, it was such a complicated thing, especially to understand from a level of physics why he did what he did, that I had to include it on a DVD. Now, this is why we're coming out with DVDs, both the Farsight experiments as well as Crucifixion Ruse. The reason is, when you come to our stuff, there's so much there, you get overwhelmed. You don't know where to do it. You don't know where to go. So what we do is say, all right, let's simplify this. You want to know what we're doing? Very easy to understand. Everybody's got a DVD player. Get this one DVD, put it in the player, sit down, and the reason we couldn't do it on YouTube is everybody has a 2-minute attention span, and they surf. A DVD actually gets them to sit in front of a TV set and watch it. And they get the whole thing explained, and that's what you want to do. So if you want to know all the projects that we do, hit the ground running, knowing what we're doing and all about it, just get the Farsight experiments, and you'll know about it. And if you're more adventurous and you also want to know something that was done independently, just like there's major releases coming out of Hollywood, but then you also have independent films that you end up seeing at the Sundance Film Festival, well, the Crucifixion Ruse is an independent project. And I think it's fascinating, actually, that the board of directors, mind you, I'm the leading board and the whole director. Lynn Buchanan, who's the lead instructor, retired military for CRV methodology, he's on the board of directors. Glenn Wheaton, who's the lead instructor in HRVG, or Hawaii Remote Viewing Guild procedures, and he's retired. Lynn Buchanan came out of DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency. Glenn Wheaton came out of Special Forces Intelligence. And the DIA program was an official military program. The Special Forces program later became known as the 1st Earth Battalion, and that was not an official program. It was more like a movement within the military, led by Jim Channon. Anyway, so those two guys are on the board, plus Bruce Kaufman, an academic like myself, but he's at Georgia State. They all voted it down without even looking at the data for a second, just because the topic was too controversial. So I decided this is a great time to start the new idea of having independent remote viewing projects that are fully fleshed out. Mind you, we're the only place that does these types of projects. So this is very different from somebody who's on a late night radio and simply talking about something that the remote viewers did. What we do is always, we have the public participate in the collection of the data, often in holding the data. I'll explain that later when I talk about our other projects. And we show all the data. We have the track records of all of our viewers so people know who the viewers are. So many times you hear someone talk on late night radio and they say, what our viewers discovered, and you don't know who the viewers are, you don't know their track records. It could be anybody. Or nobody. It could just be a lie. You just have no idea what's actually happening. So with us, and I'm not saying that other remote viewers are when they present things, are lying. I'm just saying that saying something is hearsay. And did my graduate work in Missouri. And so Missouri has this slogan called, show me. I always thought that was a great slogan, show me. You shouldn't believe anybody, no matter what they say, even if they're a scientist. The idea of a scientist or anybody saying, I went into this room and we did some experiments and this is what we saw, trust me. Those days are gone. You don't do that anymore. There's no such thing as trust me anything. So what we have done at the Farsight Institute is master the realm of public participation in our remote viewing experiments, so nobody has to trust anyone. So anyway, the two DVDs are the Farsight experiments. That's the one you should really start with to see what we do. And then our website will make much more sense because it's got so much stuff on it. You won't get overwhelmed anymore. You'll sort of know, all right, this is what they do. And then the Crucifixion Ruse, if those of you who are interested in the Jesus drama. The thing I want to mention lastly about the Jesus drama, the last thing I want to mention about it is, if we are all frequencies, then the way we are, and this will be the last thing I say about it, the way we are is defined by our set of frequencies. And the more cut off we are, the more narrow the band of frequencies in our perceptions, the more isolated and alone we will feel, and the more polarized we will have. We will see other people as enemies. We will see everything in terms of polarized good and bad. The only way Jesus could have experienced the crucifixion is to lower his frequency, is to actually make himself like us, such a narrow band receiver. And then he would have been lost like us. Nobody escapes. Once you are in our particular frequency band, nobody escapes easily. Jesus had to keep that connection with the higher realm in order to help lead us out of where we're stuck. That was the whole purpose. Think of a guy who jumps into the ocean in order to save somebody who's drowning, only to find that he also gets swept away. That's what would have happened to Jesus if he made himself like us. So he could not have gone to the crucifixion drama on the level of physics, because then he would have experienced polarized way of thinking that we do, and he would have been like us, and he wouldn't have been able to help anybody.
Very interesting.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you very much for calling in.
Thank you.
Now, this is what I thought he was going to ask initially, and I honestly had this question too. About how many remote viewers would you say are in operation right now?
Fewer than 20.
Really?
Oh, it's a serious problem. And in fact, I'll give you the long and short of it real quick. It's one of the greatest crises we've had. We spent 20 years training remote viewers here in the United States. Catherine, Rand, I'm going to tell you stuff that we talk about behind closed doors at this point. But at this point, I don't care. People might as well know. It's extremely frustrating to teach people remote viewing in the United States. So frustrating that we have almost stopped doing it. Let me explain why. Now, Lynn Buchanan still does some training, and Glenn Wheaton still does some training out in the Hawaiian remote viewing guilds. But let me explain why. When we train a group of remote viewers and invest a lot of time, we basically do it at cost. The Hawaii Remote Viewers Guild doesn't charge anything for remote viewing training, but they've got a good thing going because they're locked on an island and no one can escape. They've got sharks around them. But if you're not in Hawaii and you're on the mainland, basically as soon as we end up training people and they get good enough, the first thing that they say is, hey, I'm going to make myself into a guru and earn a lot of money, and they start chasing tuition dollars. They run off, take a bunch of the remote viewers that you've trained with them, and then they start up their own school and they start to sell tuitions to make themselves rich. And that happens every time. And their remote viewers end up doing the same thing to them. So the problem is there's too much money in the society, and as soon as you get good, you realize you have a unique skill that other people don't have, and the first thing you want to do is go off and earn money. Now, if there was another way to make money other than teaching it in the United States, then they would do that. But teaching is really the way people have been doing it. So what we have found is we basically stopped teaching at the Farsight Institute. We're going to start up again, but we stopped teaching it because of that problem. We realized we could teach for another 20 years and we'd be back in the same situation.
Sounds like what you're saying is there's a lot of remote viewers, but very few of them, fewer than 20, are real seasoned remote viewers.
That's right, and they're about equally split between the Hawaii Remote Viewers Guild and the group led by Lynn Buchanan using CRV. What we're going to be doing in the near future is starting training in Africa, and hopefully we're investigating Japan also. Africa is a particularly useful venue for us because Africa is broke. They have no money. They have no jobs. They have, in Kenya, for example, which is where we're thinking of starting, they have an extremely well-educated populace. The school system is spectacular. However, the graduates have no jobs. There's no money. So if we train people in Kenya, there are no tuition dollars for them to go chasing. They can't go off and start their own school. And now, I'm firmly in belief that people are healthy when they have a good, solid ego and they want to become the best of the world. I like it when people aspire to be, piano players that play at Carnegie Hall. I mean, it's great. But the issue is when we invest a huge amount of time training people, we'd like them to stick around long enough so that they will do projects for us and our scientific stuff. So to do that, what we need to do is to pay the remote viewers. So one of the things that we're doing with our DVDs is when we sell our DVDs, the money is actually used to pay the remote viewers so that they can have a source of income. And in Africa, they don't have to be paid very much. A teacher, for example, in Africa lives very well. A good, solid, like high school teacher lives very well on $300, $350 a month. So, and most people have no jobs at all. So if they were doing sessions for $50 a session, that's a fortune for them. If they do 6 sessions, that's $300. So if they were doing sessions for even $25 a piece, that's a fortune for them. And they wouldn't go anywhere. They wouldn't like run off and start their own schools and abandon us and not. They would gladly keep working. So we're thinking of trying to do that. So basically, there are fewer than 20 really good remote viewers, and the reason for that is not because of any lack in effort on our parts, Glenn's part or Lynn's part or my part, for training people. We have tried. Believe me, we have tried. We have trained so many people. But because we don't have an ability to pay them lots of money per sessions afterwards, they very quickly start looking for money, really quickly afterwards. I had one person come, for example, to learn remote viewing in some courses that we were set up back in the 1990s. And he said, I'm so glad I was able to get on your course right now. And we said, why? Because he had already scheduled and sold out 3 seminars in Japan where he was going to be teaching remote viewing, and he had to learn it before the seminars happened, and they were starting 2 weeks later. And so, I'm not criticizing it. Believe me, I'm not criticizing it. I think it's wonderful. People are self-empowered and want to do this. But on the other hand, would that person be doing sessions for us? Would that person become a really expert remote viewer, invest 10 years in becoming really super great? No, the person wanted to go off and do their own seminars, and that's fine. Let them do that. So what we did was we came up with an audio course, which is 18 hours, 24 lessons long, and we put it up on our website, hosted it by YouTube, and we have a free printable text. So anybody that wants to know the procedures, hey, there's a whole 18-hour course, 24 lessons, plus a free printable text. You can know everything, and if you want to start up your school in Timbuktu, go right ahead. I mean, it's all right. Go do whatever you want with it. But the point is, we have to actually not have fewer than 10 or 15 viewers. We have to have 15,000 viewers. We need hundreds of viewers minimally to do what we want to do, to change the planet the way we want to change it. And so we've really got to come up with a solution for this. We have another problem, and if your audience is not sweating when I tell you this other problem, they should be sweating. Lynn Buchanan and Glenn Wheaton aren't getting any younger. They're still alive, and they're still functioning and still doing things, but, people don't live forever. And what happens if something were to happen? And so this is a very serious situation. We're like dancing on the edge of the Grand Canyon, and one small step, and we'll go over the edge, and it would be very easy for the entire remote viewing field to disappear.
Well, we would love to have you back on again. Maybe we could help find some students for you. We could put a call out and maybe do an experiment before you come back again.
Well, actually, we don't. Let me just explain that. A lot of people sometimes ask if we'll do experiments like on the radio and stuff. We actually don't do that, because what we do is our experiments involve a lot of preparation, and they're enormously time-consuming. And when we do them, we actually insist that the world watch. I'll give you an example on how we did the Multiple Universes project. When we do experiments, we make sure that everyone can participate, that the public can participate, everyone can see we don't cheat, and I'll explain the procedures that we use to do that. And then we invest so much time that we don't do anything else, meaning I'm not giving any radio interviews at those time. We're just doing the experiments. We're giving radio interviews now precisely because we stopped doing the experiments. We sort of concluded with a bunch of stuff. We've just finished another project, which I'm going to be talking about a little bit at the International Remote Viewers Association meeting in Las Vegas in this month, as well as mentioning it at the Society for Scientific Explorations meeting in the University of Colorado at Boulder this month. But we're going to be coming up with a DVD that'll explain the whole thing because it's really big. We actually investigated a prior human civilization on Earth. I think a lot of people like to think of it as the Atlantean civilization.
Wow.
So let's just call it a prior human civilization on Earth that really did exist. We have really good Google Earth images of the ruins of the thing. And mainstream science is ferociously trying to, not talk about it. But the issue is we didn't pop out of the blue. The evolutionary people will tell you, we evolved from monkeys and we popped out of the blue very recently. But that's ridiculous. You can't have a complex human form pop out of the blue like that. It takes hundreds of millions of years for a complex human form to evolve out of apes. The reality was there were two evolutionary things going on. It is true we had the normal Darwinian thing going on. Evolution, as envisioned by Darwin, in a way did actually occur. But we didn't come out of the monkeys. We're basically genetic experiments that have come about because of extraterrestrial involvement. So there were two evolutionary things. The human thing was really quite separate from the simian evolutionary thing. But the real basic thing is that only 70,000 years ago, only 70,000, that's not long ago, there was a human civilization, us, on this planet that was a little bit more technologically advanced than we are now, but we're really close. And as far as the extraterrestrials are concerned, we're really an exciting species to watch because we're like the species that doesn't die. Out of that collapse that happened 70,000 years ago, and what I'm going to tell you now is not in dispute in the scientific community. This is not in dispute. 70,000 years ago, the scientific community does recognize that there was a bad day and that all humans were killed off except for 2,000 individuals, meaning the geneticists have figured this out. We are all related to the exact same 2,000 individuals who survived whatever happened 2,000 years ago.
I saw a documentary about that.
Yeah, and that's not in dispute. But what's so interesting is we now have the full story. We have great Google Earth images, and we even have another drama. As we were coming to the conclusion of our study, Google Earth images and all of those data come from the U.S. government. Don't be confused and say they come from an Oceanographic Institute or Google Earth or private. Everything is governmental. All of the data are government data. All the Google Earth data come out of the National Reconnaissance Office. They're governmental data. And the military has an involvement with a great deal of it. And the data were changed. Literally, Google 2.0 came out just a couple months before we were finishing our study. They've been watching us. The government, we're completely open. We don't encrypt anything. We let the government see everything. They knew we were coming out with our study. We knew we'd figured out the entire thing. And so they tried to actually whitewash the images on Google Earth on the bottom of the ocean. I mean, it was so fascinating to actually watch it. It couldn't be better. So we not only have the original images, plus we have the remote viewing data, which exactly describes not only what the civilization was like, but what happened on that day and why it happened. But we also have a governmentalist have to erase the images before we come out with all the data. I mean, it doesn't get better than that. So we're going to have that DVD come out in the near future. But for right now, your listeners should go to the Farsight Experiments and Crucifixion Ruse. Those are the two DVDs that we have out right now that are ready to go.
That's great.
But anyway, that's the type of exciting projects we do. If you want, you can ask me about the Multiple Universes Project. Remember, the four big ones that we've got out is the Multiple Universes Project, the Operational Base on Mars, the Exploding Planet between Mars and Jupiter, and the Post-2012 Earth Changes.
I know most people are going to want to know about the Post-2012 Earth Changes.
Yeah, now the only trouble with that is we only have 18 minutes left. It's a 2-hour interview, right?
Yes.
And that project is going to take more than 18 minutes.
Will you come back on then?
Oh, of course.
Great. You heard it, listeners. We locked him down live on the radio. So what topic would you like to discuss?
Well, I think it would be doable within the 18 minutes that's left to do the operational base on Mars.
Sounds good to me.
Sounds good to you? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and by the way, this is a project that is available on our website, farsight.org, and in the DVDs. You go to all the data are up on the website, farsight.org, and if you get the DVD, what you get is the data plus the full explanation of it. So let me start with the NASA described image. And there's a good picture of the NASA described image on the DVD, but it's also a good picture on the website also. And to get to the project on the website, you just click on the banner that says the Mysteries Project, and Under that, you'll see evidence of artificiality on Mars, and that's the Mars Project. But again, I really encourage you to get the DVD because that's where it's really explained in a full project and all of the details, so you get everything. But you see a really good image. Now, this image comes from NASA JPL Mail and Space Science Systems, and it's a picture of a spray, a huge, huge spray that comes out of a nozzle, a hose, a nozzle that's horizontally placed. Looks like a waste, liquid waste that's being sprayed out of a nozzle. And the nozzle is connected to a pipeline that goes to a dome. It's very clear on the image. There's even a shadow underneath the spray, so you know it's an airborne spray. Now, the spray really got our attention. Like, what is that spray doing there? And why is it connected to the pipeline and a nozzle? We know of no geological processes that would produce a horizontal spray coming from a pipeline, coming from a horizontal nozzle. If you look at Yellowstone, Old Faithful, that's a hole in the ground, and the spray comes vertically up, making a plume. This is not a vertical plume on Mars. This is a horizontal spray with a shadow underneath it.
Yeah.
And so we know of no geological processes that could cause that. And then when you see the nozzle, which is a very straight pipe, with a shadow underneath it, connected to a pipeline going to a dome, and there's two other domes right next to it, and then a very large dome next to it. And the domes are shiny. If you look at a domed rock out in the Grand Canyon or something, or actually maybe in the Rocky Mountains, you get high enough above the tree line, they're rough, they're scratchy, they're not shiny. Well, these domes are shiny and smooth, and they look like they're made from like a resin material. And so we would not have investigated them had it not been for this spray. But this spray was discovered by a guy called Patrick Skipper, who runs a website called MarsAnomalyResearch.com. And when we saw that spray, I said, this is just too good to be true. I'm eventually going to have to assign the viewers to this. So we have a bunch of viewers, and the best on the planet. And I eventually said, okay, this time we're going to do an operational target and a strictly scientific target. And a scientific target is like, a scientific project is like when we are doing experiments investigating the nature of reality. But an operational target is when we're trying to find out something about some place. So this is an operational target where we're trying to find out about what this thing is. So, mind you, we just told the viewers, there is a target. Do it. Do your thing. And this is all done via email, so they do not get to see my face, no voice, no expressions in the voice, no facial expressions that might make them think, maybe. And also, we had never given them esoteric ET-type targets ever over many years. So they were not expecting anything like this. They were expecting normal scientific reality-type targets. And so they did their stuff, and what they came in were really, these are good viewers. So they came in with really great data exactly describing what's in the picture. They got the spray. They got the composition of the spray, no less. They got the nozzle, that it was being sprayed under pressure. They followed the pipeline back. They got the domes. They described the terrain. Picture perfect. I mean, these people, when I say there's fewer than 20 of these people, you really should be saying 20 is too small. There should be 2,000 of these people. If something happens to us, the whole thing is lost. And so basically, they got all of that, but they're also well-trained. They did all these sessions solo, no monitors that could lead them. Once they saw that there's a spray and a dome and a pipeline, they did the natural thing. Without anybody in the room telling them what to do, they said, well, I've got to give a complete description of what's here, what's inside these domes. So then they went inside the domes, and that's when the data departed from what we were just seeing in the picture. So first they verified everything was in the picture. And they said, basically, what we see is, in fact, what we really do, what's really there. It is really a spray. It really is an artificial nozzle. And it really is, by the way, it's a waste disposal spray. They're pumping out waste.
Wow.
And the nozzle is really connected to a pipeline, and it does go into a dome. Well, what's in the dome is absolutely fascinating. Again, the DVD is where you get the detail, but what's in the dome, actually there's multiple domes, is so unbelievable. What's in the domes is very interesting. First of all, you know, like the pyramids in Giza, you can get You can go into the pyramids by following these tunnels. Well, some of the domes are like that. They have like tunnels, but there's also large rooms, huge rooms in there. They are occupied. There's people in there.
Whoa.
Now, I'm going to say something now. And not only, people have often said there's bases on Mars, but no one's ever said, there it is exactly. That's the picture. Those are the coordinates. This is the NASA picture, and this is exactly what's going on inside that place that's right there in front of your eyes. No one ever did that before. It's not like some vague, nebulous base on Mars. It's, there it is, folks. That spot right there. And so that's never been done before. And so what we found out, and I'm just summarizing now because the rest of it is in the DVD. What we found out is that there are people in the domes. I'm going to say something that I normally would say at the end, but I'm going to say it now. We don't know who those people are. Unfortunately, none of the viewers said whether they're from Earth or whether they're extraterrestrial. So we don't know. And some of the military guys like Lynn Buchanan and Glenn Wheaton really emphasized to me, Courtney, the word extraterrestrial is not in these sessions, so you cannot say that they're extraterrestrials. So I'm telling you right now, we cannot say definitively that they're extraterrestrials. It has been pointed out to me that there are so many black projects that launch off of Cape Canaveral that are never reported in the news, that they could have their own, they could be Americans.
That's right.
In a black operation. They have so many, they don't have just like shuttle launches. The shuttle's out of business now, but they don't have just like public launches. They have zillions of launches out of Cape Canaveral that are for military projects that you never ever hear about. And there also could be that there were some ships that were reverse engineered in Area 51, ET ships, crash ships perhaps, that they got working again, and that's what's happening. That they are actually Americans who went there and are working on this base. So we cannot say for sure who they are. My personal belief is, and I have reasons to believe this, is that they are extraterrestrial, that they are not humans from Earth. But I have to say the data don't say that explicitly. So that's my personal interpretation of these data, and others may disagree. Okay, so what it is the facility that's there is an absolutely ancient facility. And the facility is not, or was not built by the people who are there now. So the people who are there now are different people. And they do not fully appreciate that the buildings, the facility, is not theirs. So they sort of think of it as their place, but it's really not. It was built by other people long, 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 long ago. The technology they mostly understand, but not entirely. It's a stressful situation to some extent. It's a bit of a hardship post because they are missing spare parts. They don't have full capabilities of getting the whole thing up and running. It's a mixture of a military and civilian thing because some people are in uniforms and some people are in, and this will be the last thing I'll mention because the rest of it is in the DVD, some people are in white lab coats. So, it's sort of a mixture of things. They have extremely high technology in there, but they also have a couple of people that are extremely spiritually oriented. That's one of the reasons that makes me think this is not a U.S. military type of thing. Some of the people are extremely spiritually oriented and involved in extreme versions of like spiritual stuff. And if it was a U.S. military thing, that just wouldn't go on. That's my personal opinion. Anyway, let me pause now. Again, the whole Mars thing, plus the multiple universe thing, exploding planet, and most importantly, the post-2012 Earth changes is on the DVD, The Far Side Experiments.
Very interesting. Do you have a question, Rand, that you'd like to ask?
God, pick one of many. So I guess we are the particle expression of the wave. So how would one who might have a propensity for remote viewing start to explore that gift and then possibly contact your Farsight and take it to the next level? Like lucid dreaming or out of body? Is that a kind of precursor to remote viewing?
Absolutely. All that stuff is there. The only thing is becoming clear with what these experiences actually are. So for those people who want to go further, there's a couple of recommendations. The very first is to know what we've already done. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. So the very first is to start with the Farsight Experiments DVD. The second thing is if you want to learn the procedures yourself, we have a free audio course, 18 hours, 24 lessons. It's not, it's not something they have to pay for. So, and with that is a free printable text. You have to put a little bit of elbow grease in. You have to read the text, and you have to listen to the coursework. So it's not something like we just put a wand on your head and tap it and suddenly you're there. So it's like anything else. You have to study it, but it's available and it doesn't cost you anything. Well, you have to buy paper and a pen, but other than that, you're okay. The third thing is, if you want to get further into it, it's my book. My book is the only book in print on remote viewing that is the science of remote viewing as it's performed using these U.S. military or military-derived procedures. And the book is called Remote Viewing, The Science and Theory of Non-Physical Perception. And the cover of the book and the description of the book can be found right on the homepage of our website, www.farsight.org. So if I were suggesting 3 things to begin, first thing is just hit the ground running. See the Farsight Experiments DVD. Secondly, decide whether you want to learn the procedures next or if you want to learn more about the science. If you want to learn more about the science of the phenomenon itself, read my book. Then, if you want to do the procedures, you can do the procedures and actually go through the YouTube course, or you can do it in reverse. You can start with the Farsight Experiments DVD, but then you can go either to the free course or read the book, or do the book and then read the course. You do the course afterwards. It's sort of your choice. But those 3 things are the big ones on the block. And if you really want to go to see sort of an out there sort of, challenging everything type of thing, you might get the DVD called The Crucifixion Ruse, because that is really... That's one of my favorite projects, although I only talk about it in settings in which people are comfortable with talking about the subject.
That's an intriguing subject. I'd like to see that. I think I'm going to get that myself.
It's really worth it. It's the only study of its kind ever. And once you realize it, once you put everything together, it just makes total sense. I mean, the Bible, the 4 books of the Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Gospels, those were written not by the actual disciples. Those were written for many years, up to 150 years after the death of Christ. So they were written over long periods of time, and biblical scholars argue about each phrase in there, trying to decide, which author added what phrase and all that other stuff. And also, Jesus was really good. He was really, really smart. He was a lot smarter, a lot more interesting, a lot more daring, a lot cooler of a person than religions portray him. Religions portray him as a stoic god that was sort of dull. He saved people, smiled on them, put his hands on them, healed them, but he doesn't seem like a real person. He seems sort of funky. He seems sort of like that's not what a real person does. They don't live like that. They joke, they laugh, they have a good time, and they're clever. They think of funny things. Well, that's what Jesus was, plus he was a really interesting person. He was extremely intelligent, and he saw the big picture. The big picture was to get the message into humanity as quick as possible so that it could work its way through over 2,000 years so that the entire civilization, the entire human experiment wouldn't be a write-off. And I'm meaning a total write-off. So that was a big deal. Anyway, for those of you who are interested in something like that, you're welcome to it. But if you want to start with the basics, it's the Farsight Experiments DVD.
That's great, Courtney. I can't wait to have you come back on again.
Yes.
Yes, most definitely. I even asked Tamara for a date, and we'll talk to you about that after we finish the show. Okay, at this time, I want to thank everyone for coming out this evening or listening in the archives. We really appreciate it when you come back and listen to the show, because you're just as much as part of the truth in connecting it as we are. We would like to play everyone out with Tamara's outro and a new artist we're featuring on the show called the Anunnaki. The song is called Hybrid. Have a great night.
Good night.
Something happened here.
Hi everyone, Tamara here. Just a reminder that you can connect with us through Facebook, as well as subscribing to us on our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/truthconnection. We'd love you to join us during live shows at blogtalkradio.com/truthconnection. And for information on upcoming shows, visit our website at truthconnections.wordpress.com. Thank you for your support, and never forget that the truth is reality, and the connection is you.
Is that they created language online specifically to be the middlemen and women educating over the ancient world as the dead gods.